Welcome to Crypto Corner. I'm JD Durkin, contributor here on Schwab Network. It's time now to take a look at this week's moves in Bitcoin as well as the overall crypto space. Join us now is Adam Lynch, director at Schwab's Equity Research Department. Adam, great to have you here. Let's start with a conversation on all things BTC. Is the risk on market mentality, you think, firmly back on for the Bitcoin bulls? We're up 40% or so off those April 7th lows. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think we are maybe hitting a little bit of a high here, right? We've started to see some resistance in this 105, 110 area. We dipped back down to 103 or so now after that big run up. So I'm not seeing it pop as much on the positive news. Didn't really move much on Monday. We could be at a spot here where we might be trading sideways for a little while. I don't see a ton of near-term catalysts to drive this one higher. I think it could move on some more of this, crypto reserve, additional supply concerns, some of that. But at the end of the day, it has popped back up to where it was to start the year. And it's had a really successful run during this risk-off environment. Now we'll see if it's able to kind of transition back to that growth sort of technology type trading as it has in other times when risk on has been more favorable. So
yeah, Adam,
we'll see about that one.
Yeah, well, you kind of answered the next question I have, which was, are you expecting near-term catalyst in the near future here? Anything here for crypto enthusiasts to look onto? And I suppose, is there anything big in terms of regulatory or support out of Washington, D.C. that you've been hearing about that you think might be a move of interest to long-term holders?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've seen a lot recently with some of these approvals from different states, with their kind of passing some of the Bitcoin legislation. I think those things could be catalysts. You're also seeing some companies just kind of completely shift their strategy to, hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet, become these BTC custody sort of companies. And if that stuff continues, I think we could see some things there. Ethereum has had a really interesting week, right? That's popped over 40% the past week. That one had a few of its own little catalysts. There was a big technological change that they made about a week ago, which essentially improved the efficiency of the entire chain. So that moved the price a little bit. And then there was some additional, I think, sentiment, momentum kind of catching back up to the other, the Bitcoin move there. So we'll see how it progresses. It's obviously a really wild spot and it can change daily. So
yeah, Ether's still down about 35% or so, from its all-time high. What more are you seeing there in the technicals on ETH? I feel like a lot of people, maybe understandably so, given market cap and other considerations, they tend to gravitate more naturally towards Bitcoin, but we don't want ETH to be left out of the conversation either.
That's true. Yeah, Ethereum is obviously a little bit different. You've got the whole technological differences between Bitcoin and Ether. We won't go into that today, but it has a unique, I would say, group of followers out there. There are all sorts of different things that are being built on the Ethereum blockchain. You've got L1, you've got L2. There are all sorts of different projects that people are launching on that. So I think it could be a really interesting one to watch in the future. Bitcoin's a little bit more constrained when people try to play around with that sort of stuff on it. So, yeah, we'll see.
All right, I want to ask you about Coinbase, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's perhaps a great description to see what the company has gone through in just the last 72 hours. It has been a staggering bit of news here. The good, including the company set to be included, of course, starting on the 19th to the S&P 500. But let's start with some of the other stuff because I want to get your take. Today, a lot, we're talking about this hacking scandal that has largely forced the stock down, currently trading about 6.5% as of this Thursday afternoon. The company receiving an extortion email from criminals who had obtained at least some personal information from the users. How do you see this, and can the company restore any lost trust or confidence from a lot of their users, about 100 million or so of them?
Yeah, it obviously has been a roller coaster of a week for the company. Starting out Monday, finding out about its inclusion in the index, it popped, almost 25%, I think, on that day. And then yesterday happened, today happened, and the momentum, the sentiment around the stock has really changed. So you're right. They had an unknown actor that essentially took some information and tried to hold the company hostage. They did not pay. They contacted authorities, are working with them to obviously, you know, remediate the situation. They are, I believe, on the hook for somewhere between 200 and 400 million dollars. They think to remediate it, to you know, kind of voluntarily reimburse some of their customers. From a PR standpoint, right? I don't know if that's going to be too much of a concern. I mean, we've seen every company out there has had customer data hacked, this or that. I hear ads for something on my podcasts every day about the average hack takes something like 270 days before the company even comes out and says it. I think Coinbase has really done a good job getting out in front of this one here. So hopefully people won't lose too much confidence in them over what is really not, I don't think, a huge concern. I mean, obviously, when any of this stuff happens, there is concern. Coinbase has mentioned they are reevaluating a lot of their security protocols and policies. So hopefully they'll kind of continue to move forward with this one well, and yeah, set everybody at ease at the end of the day.
Yeah, now, Adam, as if that weren't enough, just a couple of hours ago, further putting downward pressure on Coinbase, a stock, a New York Times report that the SEC is investigating the company about whether or not Coinbase misstated its user numbers in prior disclosures. Obviously, it's a bit newer in terms of the news that we're talking about as of late. What did you see out of the headlines there the last few hours?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. User count in this world is very difficult. Anybody out there can have multiple accounts, multiple wallets, all sorts of different ways to kind of stagger this stuff and kind of lay out your accounts. I think that this one could be a little bit more of a concern than the prior hack that we were discussing, right? A hack, hey, that's not our fault. Something like this could be. So I think they could be a little bit more on the hook for this one. And if I were paying attention to one or the two stories, it would be that second one and what's going on with the SEC.
All right, let's talk about some of the more positive news for the company. At least I'd have to imagine the sorts of things Coinbase wants to talk about. Inclusion, first and foremost, to the S&P 500. They also just had a huge acquisition, Deribit, a derivatives exchange based over in the Middle East, something the company was talking about during the news cycle the first half of the week. Specifically to the point about the inclusion, what does this signal to you about how investors are perceiving not just a company like Coinbase, but the industry writ large right now, Adam?
Yeah, I think it's a huge step, right? I really don't think we should understate this. Obviously, starting Monday, right, it's going to be added to the index. It's taking over for Discover Financial. It's a huge step forward for the industry. I think it adds to some legitimacy. I think it's a big shift in terms of how the public really kind of perceives these types of companies, the industry in general. You had the CEO of Coinbase, Brian Adams, on, I believe it was yesterday, talking about how every American now will have Bitcoin, crypto, whatever, in their 401k, right? Because pretty much all of those 401ks are going to be invested in some sort of passive product that tracks the S&P 500. That's why the stock popped so much when we found out it was going to be included, right? There's an index effect there. All of the passive products that track the S&P 500 now have to buy Coinbase. So it's a huge increase in demand for the stock. It's obviously huge for the company, their shareholders, and I think it could just be maybe the first step in some other companies that are maybe operating in the crypto or crypto adjacent field. I think we could see some more of those coming in the future.
Finally, Adam, I want to get your take from this great state of New Hampshire. Live free or die, the first state in the U.S. to sign a major crypto reserve bill. It will allow the state to invest public funds directly into crypto reserves. How big of a deal is this? And I wonder, are there other states you are expecting to see shortly follow suit after the lead of New Hampshire?
Yeah, this is a fun one too. We had talked about this a couple weeks ago because Arizona was the first state that was getting close. They had passed legislation through both their state house and state senate, but as expected, their Democratic governor, Katie Hobbs, vetoed that. She said this state has far higher priorities than this. We'll deal with that, once we get through these other things like education, healthcare, what have you. Now, Up steps New Hampshire, right? Shouldn't be too surprised given its live free or die motto. And last week, their Republican governor, Kelly Ayotte, signed a bill that won them the race to be the first state to actually pass something through. So what the law actually does is it authorizes the New Hampshire state treasurer to allocate up to 5% of the public funds into a digital asset. Now, that digital asset has to have at least a $500 billion market cap, meaning right now the only one that meets that hurdle is Bitcoin, which other states could be fighting for number 2, right? North Carolina, I think, probably has the strongest possibility. Other states have already ran into some hurdles. I mentioned Arizona. We had a similar thing happen in Florida. But the momentum in North Carolina seems the strongest. Now, either way, I think that what happened in New Hampshire is only going to increase the momentum for these types of reserves, be them at the state, higher national government level. So I would expect to kind of continue to see stories like this in the near term.
Adam, I'm about out of time, but I can't help but notice that the governor of North Carolina is a Democrat. Similar situation there to Arizona. Is this, in your opinion, firmly a party line issue at this point where members of the grand old party, the Republicans, are more inclined to be in favor with Democrats at the state level firmly against?
Maybe. I think that's an interesting one. I think in general, I would say that that's the public perception right now. The law in in North Carolina does have the support of a very large, prominent Republican politician there, so that could probably help there. I don't know. It's interesting, right? We've had comments from our current president that were very anti-crypto a couple of years ago. That sentiment has completely shifted. Who knows? Maybe it'll shift back the other way in the future. But for now, it does look like the right side, right? The GOP, your grand old party, it does look like they seem to be a little bit more in favor of some of this stuff than our friends on the left.
Yeah, well, trying to predict politicians and how they view is as impossible as trying to predict where the financial markets go. Fascinating conversation. Very grateful for your time. Adam Lynch, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
That's going to do it for this week's edition of Crypto Corner. For all things Bitcoin, Ethereum, or whatever altcoin you're following, be sure to like and subscribe to Schwab Network's YouTube channel. I'm JD Durkin. Thanks for watching.